Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Diplomatic Enclave. I'm your host, KHALID. But, well, agriculture is a very important aspect of the development of any country, especially countries such as Pakistan. Under the pandemic that has engulfed the entire world, agriculture is one of the aspects that has been affected the most. There is a specialized agency under the United Nations auspices, that is the IFAD, otherwise known as the International Fund for Agricultural Development, that works closely in order to help those countries that have been affected by COVID-19. What are the strategies as far as those of IFAD are concerned, or the United Nations for that respect, as far as countering all the negative aspects on the agricultural domain around the world and in countries such as Pakistan? And will the United Nations and IFAD be able to perform all the goals of the SDG by 2030? To talk about that and so much more, we've been joined by a guest who is here in Pakistan for a couple of days, but we managed to get hold of him during those 72 hours. His name is Ashwani MUTHOO, and he is the Director Quality Assurance Group for the IFAD. Thank you very much, Mr. MUTHOO, to have joined us today in PTV World.
Thank you very much for having me.
Mr. MUTHOO, first of all, is this your first visit to Pakistan?
Actually, it's not. I've been to Pakistan a number of times in the last 15 years, and I'm delighted that I'm back here once again. Last time I came was 2 years ago. We organized a conference, a regional conference on South-South and Triangular Cooperation with a focus on climate change. So it's been 2 years, but I'm really happy to be here once again.
All right. In those 15 years that you've been in Pakistan, what kind of changes have you seen in our governance, in our country, as far as development, especially in the agricultural sector, is concerned?
Well, there has been a lot of development, a lot of advancement and improvement. I would say the most important thing, especially from an IFAD perspective, because we focus on small farmers, I can see that much more effort is being made over the years in providing livelihoods and resilience of small farmers in rural areas to cope with climate change issues. So a lot of effort is being made, for example, in the provision of microfinance, in, for example, organizing farmers into groups so that they can access markets and other related
Let's
subjects.
talk about microfinance, because this is something that I want to understand more and more. When a country or when a certain group of farmers from a certain country or region contacts the IFAD for financing their projects, how does one go about it?
Well, this is a good question. So it's important to clarify that. IFAD being a multilateral organization, we provide concessional loans and grants. The concessional loans are provided to governments.
All right.
That have to repay those loans.
So it's an IFAD to government agreement that goes.
Correct. There's an agreement between government and IFAD for specific development projects.
All right.
That we fund in one province or more than one province.
What are the criteria for accepting any such project?
Well, first of all, they have to be consistent with IFAD's global mandate and vision for rural poverty reduction. And of course, they have to be consistent with government priorities. And to drive that, we have a country strategy for Pakistan, for example. For each country where we work, we have a country strategy which is time-bound, 3 to 4, 5 years, which we then renew depending on the changing circumstances. So the country strategy provides the overarching framework for projects to be funded within that.
When we talk of country strategy, let's talk about Pakistan before we go to other countries of the world, and of course countries where you feel your model has been really appreciated and accepted, and it has been a success for others to follow. You have a long partnership of more than 40 years as far as rural poverty reduction in the country is concerned. How would you view the progress amongst the different communities of farmers in these 4 decades?
I would say that there has been a lot of, in the initial period of our collaboration with Pakistan, we invested a lot in infrastructure development, especially for irrigation purposes. Over time, the partnership changed because the development challenges also evolved in the country itself. We have focused a lot in recent years in ensuring better productivity for farmers by providing them access to low-cost technologies, better water management, to also address the challenges with climate change. A very significant part of our work has been women's empowerment.
All right.
And microfinance, giving them access to microfinance so that they can then also get involved in income-generating activities.
There are a lot of subtopics that I'd love to discuss during the course of the show. Let's talk about the different micro projects that you talk about. What are the different projects in Pakistan that you feel have been a success?
I think the most important types of projects that IFAD has been, or IFAD in Italian, so IFAD in English, but that's fine. There have been really projects that have contributed to enhancing agricultural productivity. For example, in Punjab, we are funding a project currently, it's in the second phase already, providing efficient irrigation management, especially in the context of recurrent droughts, so that the farmers can use water in a much more efficient manner, especially for rice production, because rice is a very high intensive use of water. So those are the kind of activities we have done in recent years. But in the past, together with other multilateral organizations, in partnership, for instance, with the Asian Development Bank, we funded a number of projects for microfinance, in microfinance for women, giving access to capital for women so that they could themselves then participate in development processes, they could themselves set up small businesses, get involved in different value chains.
All right, when you talk of women empowerment, of course, the involvement of women in different kinds of projects, how do you view the overall development of this sector, that is women in Pakistan, especially in the rural areas? Do you feel that a lot needs to be done? Do you feel in the 4 decades that the IFAD has had a relationship with Pakistan, a lot has been done, or are there still lacunas?
A lot has been done, but a lot more has still to be done. A lot has been done, for example, at the grassroots level, at the rural level, in organizing women, in organizing them into groups so that they can be empowered, that they have a voice. Collectively, they can articulate what their priorities are with project management staff to access certain types of investments and resources. But a lot more still needs to be done. There are constraints to women's development and empowerment in Pakistan and elsewhere. For example, how do they actually really benefit from produce and end products that are being generated by households? To what extent can they actually have better nutrition themselves rather than looking after the family? So there are challenges that we need to still overcome.
When you talk of produce and products, does that change from country to country, region to region?
Very much it changes. It really depends on priorities of the communities, what they have historically cultivated. We have had projects, for example, where we have tried to diversify agriculture economies at the rural level, at the community level. In some cases, we have been successful. For example, in the Caribbean, historically, we funded projects that were for banana growers, to make them more efficient and more productive. But over time, we saw that the markets were being saturated. So we did promote diversification of agricultural produce into high value crops such as
When you talk
spices.
of diversification of agricultural produce, sometimes farmers understand that, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you have to introduce new forms of agricultural produce or reforms in the whole system of agriculture and how they need to follow it. Does that take time, or do you feel people in different regions or countries of the world follow your criteria very quickly and understand where you're coming from?
It takes time. Any diversification of an agricultural base takes time because it goes at the heart of traditional systems, of customs, of dietary requirements. So it does take time, and you might not be able to move away from a traditional crop completely. So you need to bring in other types of crops which are acceptable to the communities and of course to the policymakers, because ultimately we're not only producing for household level food security, we also want to contribute to national level food security, but ultimately also for exports to generate revenues not only for the country.
There's one very important aspect that you talk of food security. Now there are many other countries in the world that suffer from food insecurity. There are many countries where people go hungry because of this food insecurity. What are the measures that the IFAD takes, or what are the different guidelines that you give to different governments so that this does not happen?
Food security is a big challenge, and you made reference to the SDGs. As you know, SDG 2 focuses on zero hunger. So that's IFAD's core mandate, to make sure that there's enough production at the household level, at the country level. But it's not only about production and productivity. We also want to make sure that we're able to ensure access to food that is being produced to communities who are not farmers themselves. And this requires development of infrastructure throughout the country. So food can be transported across
There's one
regions.
another aspect that I'd like to understand your point of view on. Some of the countries make a lot of food, but most of that food is exported. and the local communities do not profit from that very food, and sometimes have to import that same food that they have exported to other countries. How does IFAD deal with that? Do you guide countries in order to curtail this?
Absolutely we do, because in our programs we also have a component on policy engagement. And we identify, when we develop programs, when we design programs, we identify certain policies that are fundamental for ensuring that projects are successful and these type of issues don't occur. We actually have policy indicators in our designs, in our logical frameworks of our designs, to make sure the government also buys into them, so that we have a policy agenda as well, accompanied by the investments that we are providing.
All right. Speaking of policies, agendas, and all the different things that you go through in order to implement those policies, when one looks through your CV and what you've done, you've been associated with the IFAS for a long time, 25 years more or less, and you have a master's degree in data engineering and a bachelor's in management and computer sciences. How much does that help for you to aid different communities across the world with different mentalities, to make them understand about how to farm correctly in order to aid their communities and of course the nation in general as well?
I think this is also a very good question. It's a rather open-ended question, and this might bring me to the topic of South-South cooperation, because I think there's a lot...
That was something also that why I wanted to ask.
There's a lot that countries have to learn from each other. Communities have to learn from each other on what models and innovations have worked in one context and whether they can be transported into another context with some adaptation. So there's a lot that needs to be done. But I think, coming back to your point about policies, I think one of the fundamental things for ensuring food security that you were speaking about earlier, it really starts at the policy level, at the highest political level, showing commitment to agriculture development, to rural transformation.
What are the criteria that you think of when you are working on a certain country, on a certain aspect of the agriculture, to develop their agricultural produce, for example?
I would say first and foremost really is the investment. It is government's allocation of national budgets for agriculture purposes.
Okay.
If I want to give you an example from Africa as a whole, the African agriculture ministers took a commitment in 2003 at the Maputo summit of the African ministers. It's called the Maputo Declaration, that governments in Africa would allocate at least 10% of their annual budgets to agriculture. Very few countries are actually doing that. So the investment does not follow the policies. It is fundamental that we have investment going into rural areas, going into agriculture, for transformation to really take place fully.
All right. We talked about the SDGs, we talked about the SDG 2, and before that were the Millennium Development Goals as well. How much of a success rate would you find different countries as far as their compliance with the Millennium Development Goals is concerned? Because when I talked to other UN leaders, they said a lot of countries were not able to come up to the deadlines of the different Millennium Development Goals. Did it happen with your goals as well?
I would say that generally countries are doing better in moving towards the SDGs, but a lot still needs to be done. And time is very short.
Yes.
And we might not meet some of the SDG targets that we have set.
Because 2030 is like right around the corner.
I think what is different between the SDGs and the MDGs is that the SDGs is really a global commitment.
All right.
It is a commitment taken by all countries. That's number one. The second advantage, or at least during the SDG focus, what I have seen is that there's a lot more monitoring of progress towards the SDGs, so you can take corrective actions, you know where the weaknesses are. Now, we might still not meet SDGs in many areas, but still there is focus, there is commitment by the international community, by the international organizations. My organization itself, in our corporate strategic framework, we have mapped our achievements to furthering certain SDGs which are closer to our mandate, of course.
All right. When you talk of mandate and you talk of different countries, I think the IFAD reacts in different manners to different countries, because every country has their own political system or their own agricultural system or their own advancements in the agricultural system. How do you map a country in order to accept their proposal, for example?
We have a number of indicators, of course. We actually provide financial allocation based on what we call a performance-based allocation system.
All right.
And within that, we undertake a rural development assessment to look at the institutions and the policies in the rural sector and score that. Of course, we have also other variables which go into the performance-based allocation system. Rural population is one example, the vulnerability of the country. But as you mentioned, fundamentally, we also give a lot of weight to the performance of the rural sector in the country itself, the quality of the institutions, the commitment of the leadership, the attention given to agriculture. So based on that, we then provide this allocation for a 3-year period for funding of projects and programs.
Vulnerability of sectors. Let's talk about COVID-19. It has made a lot of countries across the world vulnerable, especially the agricultural sector. And a lot of countries are unable to cope because of the increase in casualties, increase in people getting sick, and of course the economy getting affected directly or indirectly because of that. How is the IFAD coping with that? And what are the measures that you are taking in order to help those countries that have been seriously affected by the COVID?
It's an unprecedented global situation, and I think we're all in this together. It's a very, very serious challenge. And as you rightly pointed out, in my personal opinion, the poor rural farmers are the ones who are being most affected. Now, to answer your question more specifically, what is IFAD doing? In 2020, at the beginning of the year, March, April more or less, the organization adopted what we call the RPSF, the Rural Poor Stimulus Facility. This is our major COVID response. And we funded this with our internal resources of $40 million. And since then, we are also making efforts to mobilize additional funding from donors, and we have been successful and mobilized another $40 million already by now, and efforts are ongoing by my colleagues at IFAD to mobilize further funding for the Rural Poor Stimulus Facility. Now, through this Rural Poor Stimulus Facility, we're funding specific projects in a number of countries as COVID response. And these are projects which have short time frames. They're designed very quickly so that they can get off the ground very quickly. As compared to other types of projects, project designs and agreements take a long time. Here, no, we have to go really fast so that farmers have access to resources, so that they don't miss farming, the planting seasons. So already for now, we have funded close to 50 projects through this facility.
Across the world?
Across the world. Pakistan has also benefited from 3 such projects through this facility. Basically, small amounts of funding, few $1 million, but quickly to get farmers to have access to inputs, to have access to seeds, to be able to procure technical assistance from the market, so that they cannot miss the planting season.
All right, now you talk of specific projects, Could you give us an example, and could you also tell us how long does it take for this whole project to be implemented, especially since COVID-19 has affected the entire world?
So let me talk about the Pakistan. We have funded 3 projects for COVID response in Pakistan in a span of less than 6 months.
Okay.
One is a standalone project for $1 million. The total project cost is $2 million. So far, we have provided $1 million in grant money for fund.
Could you
so
give
basically,
more details about it?
It's being implemented in 4 or 5 districts in the country.
All right.
It is providing farmers with capital to buy inputs, to buy seeds, to be able to then do the planting. And then in the second part of the season, they will have access to agro-processing and be able to sell their produce on the market.
All
so
right.
that is one example of a project. There are 2 other regional projects in which Pakistan participates. So they're not Pakistan specific. One is to strengthen farmers' organizations throughout Asia. And Pakistan is also included.
I think that's a very important project.
This is a $2 million project, and farmers' organizations need to be empowered. They need to understand how to undertake their agriculture in this context of COVID. And the third project is providing access to digital technology to farmers. This is another one, so that they can have access to prices, opportunities for marketing through digital technology.
But you talk of digital technology, a lot of countries in the world have farmers that are illiterate. How does the IFAD help those people then?
Yeah, this is also a good point. It's basically using smartphones, for example, and most farmers in rural areas do have smartphones so that they can have immediate access to prices, information, technical assistance also through the phones, because extension workers are not able to go to the farms themselves. So those kinds of technologies. Yes.
All right. When you talk of specific projects, for example, in Pakistan, you've talked about one project, and then you've talked about farmers and giving them, different kinds of produce and telling them what to do. Sometimes farmers are ill-equipped with the proper training procedures, and every country has different needs or specificities that they need to adhere to in order to make a better produce. How does the IFAD go about then in that case? Do you train some kind of a certain community of farmers that goes and trains other farmers in turn, or do you have one local specialist that goes in every region when the specific project is signed in a country?
It's a combination, and you've answered the question. We often adopt the training of trainers methodology. So you might organize a group of farmers, and then you will train one or two of them who will then impart the training to the others. We also contribute to strengthening government's own extension services.
All right.
So it's a combination of approaches that we have to take.
All right. Would you care to talk about some of the success stories that you've had in these 25 years that you're really proud of, that you also tell all the other people that you go to and meet in different countries across the world?
I would say there are at least two success stories of IFAD over the years.
All right.
And it cuts across countries, including Pakistan. One is the whole area of empowerment of women.
All right.
IFAD has had major success in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America in empowering women, in giving them opportunities for better livelihoods. Often it is done through mobilizing women into community groups and providing access to capital. And by empowering them, by training them, also giving them a voice in decision making at the household level, at the community level. As I was mentioning earlier. So I would say this has been very successful.
And you're very proud of that?
I think we are very proud of that. Yes.
All right.
Yes. And another example is, it's a bit more narrower focused, but it is in supporting indigenous communities, tribal people, who often are amongst the most marginalized in their respective countries.
For example, could you give an example of a country?
Okay, for example, in Vietnam.
All right.
We have done a lot of work in the north of the country in bringing indigenous people into the mainstream of economic activities while respecting their heritage and customs and tradition, because that is very important. We have to recognize that. It's not a matter of mainstreaming them entirely just for the sake of
Is it easy
them.
to kind of go into those indigenous communities and understand their cultural sensibilities? Does it take a long time for the IFAD to do that, or which time has the IFAD become more or less accustomed to dealing with such communities?
IFAD has a lot of experience in doing that, but I think your question is a very good one, because implicit in your question is that one has to be very careful and respectful of their traditions and their heritage. And one of IFAD's strengths, whether it is with indigenous communities or other types of communities, it is the bottom-up participatory approach to development.
All right.
Listening to what they actually want the projects to deliver and not imposing it from the top
But
down.
Mr. Muthu, sometimes what they want to deliver is not what needs to be expected from that produce. Sometimes they don't understand the whole methodology. How does one deal with that in that case, when there is a conflict of interest?
Yes, they definitely want to have better incomes and livelihoods. So that if you can really show them that such an activity in your community will benefit you as an individual and your whole indigenous community, they're prepared to go along with it, provided, of course, they also realize that you have their interest in mind. So that is very important. So it's a matter of dialogue. It's a matter also of making sure that our interlocutors with the community are prepared for that dialogue, because you need to have experts to deal with indigenous communities, tribal populations. So that is also fundamental, and we mobilize those type of experts. We also have lots of partnership with international institutions dealing with, and networks, especially the United Nations Indigenous Peoples Forum, to provide a policy forums for indigenous people. IFAD is actually at the forefront of that in providing policy arenas. So indigenous people globally do trust IFAD as well. So there is that issue of trust as well.
Exactly. I mean, because with any community or any organization, trust is a major issue that really needs to be dealt with, and I think IFAD is doing a great job in that. You talked about women empowerment. Now, different societies across the world have different concepts of their womankind. How does the IFAD deal with those different sensibilities in different parts of the world?
Yeah, this is very important. Again, it's a very important question. And as we design a country strategy or a project, we do a lot of analytic work. We partner with local institutions, whether at the federal level or the local level, to fully understand the socio-economic fabric, in this case, of gender relations. And so we really need to make sure that our programs respond to the realities on the ground. Because if you try to bring in programs that are not sensitive to gender issues of specific contexts, they will not work. They will actually they might even be counterproductive. So there's a lot of analytic work, a lot of partnership with local institutions, and a lot of experience from other countries that we can cross-fertilize.
All right.
Of similar contexts.
All right. Tell us a little bit about your rural support portal.
The rural support portal, actually, I have to confess, I feel very proud of this because it was
That's why I left that question till the middle of the show.
It was established when I was leading the Global Engagement and Multilateral Relations Division in IFAD with a fantastic team of co-workers in my office and others in IFAD. It's a web-based platform where we are able to capture successful innovations from the grassroots, from different countries, across regions, and make them available through the internet to the whole world, to politicians, to practitioners, to development workers, to communities at the grassroots level. And these are not just stories that we put on the website in the form of text. We have videos, we have podcasts, we have films showing actually what is working on the ground, whether it is in agriculture, whether it is in livestock, whether it is in climate change, whether it is on microfinance for women. And the topics are organized by different themes. The experiences, innovations are organized by different themes, so people can search them more easily.
How does that help that poor segment of the rural community?
So the idea is, and we need to take this portal one step further to ensure greater outreach at the local level. We did a lot of outreach work already at the federal level, at the national level, and one of the limitations in the portal is the language, because primarily most of the content is still in English, and that is the next phase of development of the portal, that we have to make sure that we work with local institutions so that the content in the portal is accessible in local languages.
You talked a lot about, a bit about the South-South cooperation. What are the challenges that you have faced in that South-South, as well as the triangular cooperation that you haven't talked about?
Well, the triangular, South-South, traditionally speaking, South-South is between two countries, bilaterally.
Exactly.
The triangular is when you have an organization like IFAD comes in to facilitate that cooperation. So that's why we call it South-South and triangular cooperation. Before I talk about the challenges, IFAD has had a lot of successes with South-South and triangular cooperation. But we do need to recognize that it's not a panacea, that it's not a substitute for North-South cooperation. That's the first thing we should realize. It's not and the second thing is, it's not an end in itself. It's a means for rural transformation, for improving livelihoods. So some of the practical challenges, I would say, is that although we are trying to mainstream South-South cooperation in our programs, we're also looking for extra budgetary resources.
All right.
And those still have not been as forthcoming as we would have wished. We have benefited from a generous contribution from China of $10 million, and we have established a dedicated facility for South-South cooperation with the $10 million. But now we're looking for other generous member states to come and replenish the facility.
How has the reaction been? Because you said that you are looking for donations from generous states. How would you evaluate the relationship of IFAD with different donor countries over the years? Do you feel there is a status quo in it? And I'd really like your very candid opinion on that. Or do you feel that there are some lacunas that over the years a lot of countries have desisted as far as donating? What do you feel has been done? Are you happy with it? Are you not that satisfied? What do you feel are the challenges in that respect? Because United Nations mostly works on donations, and that is what you then work further. I mean, if the donations aren't coming, then you won't be able to work on your major projects.
So let me spend a minute or two on this very interesting question. So IFAD is an organization composed of 177 member states. And these member states are divided into 3 lists. You have list A are the OECD countries,
Okay.
list B are the OPEC countries, and list C are the developing countries. What is unique about IFAD is that these lists work really very much in partnership. Now, but coming to the funding issue, majority of the funding is really from the list A countries, OECD countries. But increasingly, list C countries, developing countries, have been contributing more to IFAD replenishment resources.
And why is there this change in trend?
I will answer that question in a
Okay.
second as well. But I don't want to forget list B, the
Okay.
OPEC countries, because
Okay.
they have historically provided a lot of resources to IFAD. And actually, it was with very, very generous contributions from OPEC that IFAD was established. But now to answer your question, why has there been a change? And there has been an increase in contributions to IFAD from list C countries, developing countries. That is because in the 40 years since IFAD has existed, the economic situation in these list C countries, developing countries, has also transformed, has improved overall.
And maybe also thanks to projects of the IFAD.
That also. So let's take the case of Pakistan. I'll take an example here. Over time, Pakistan has increased its contributions to IFAD resources.
Okay.
And in the last replenishment, which took place in 2017, Pakistan provided $9 million to IFAD for IFAD's core work. And actually, this makes me talk about the current replenishment, which is the 12th replenishment which we're going through, which will conclude in December. And Pakistan and other countries, all the member states, will be invited to make a further pledge for the 12th replenishment to IFAD. And we're looking forward, of course, to an increase of contribution by Pakistan and other countries.
The countries, this is a little bit of a critical outlay of the whole aspect of donation. There are countries that have increased and there are countries that have kind of backed out of the donation. And this is general as far as United Nations and the relationship of certain countries. Let's not go there and let's not name them. But how does the IFAD work around that then? Because there are a lot of projects that you are working on and all of a sudden you get to know that X, Y or Z country isn't continuing with the same donation trend that it had been going in the years. How does one deal with that? How do organizations like yours, counter that?
Again, a very pertinent question for IFAD, because we are transforming our financial model for generating resources that we can then use for our programs.
All right.
We still rely heavily on what we call core contributions, donations by member states. But we realize precisely what you said. So what we are doing, together with that, we have started borrowing, we have a borrowing framework, and we're borrowing resources from sovereign institutions.
All right.
So we have mobilized resources, additional resources. And more recently, we have also got a credit rating. IFAD has got a credit rating, and we're very proud of that, double A plus.
All right.
So this might, in the future, if the member states allow us to borrow also from the private market, but we're not there yet. But we do borrow resources from sovereign sources.
Fine.
From government-related institutions that are willing to borrow to IFAD. Because both the core contributions, which as I mentioned earlier, still form the bulk and form the bedrock of our financial base, the borrowed resources also help us augment the programs that we can fund in more than 100 countries. Currently, we have programs in about 100 countries globally. So we're funding, and those programs are, the total cost of those programs, the ongoing ones, are about $7-8 billion.
All right. Mr. Muthoo, are there certain criteria in which you start a program with a country and you're not satisfied with the progress that that country is going through or going ahead with? You're not satisfied by the way, or they are not complying with the different modalities of the agreement that you had with the country. What happens then?
So after we provide funding, implementation is government's responsibility.
All right.
And we do periodic supervisions of the projects to look at the progress. And we usually do that once a year, and sometimes even more frequently. But to answer your question more specifically, those are the opportunities through the supervision missions when we get a sense if things are on track or not. If they're not on track, through supervision missions, we make recommendations to government. Please, look, these things are not on track, and you need to pay more attention to these areas in the next 1 year. And when we come next time, we really hope to see progress in meeting those targets. In worst case scenarios, in other cases, what happens is we might have to restructure projects. Together with government agreement, of course, certain components might not be delivering the intended results for a number of reasons.
What if governments are not compliant?
Well,
Just an example.
no,
I mean, I need to understand, how you deal with different
in
strategies.
extreme situations, we might also cancel.
All right.
We might also cancel part of the loan if the project was intended for to be implemented in a 6-year period, and after 3 years things are not working. There have been projects where we might cancel the remaining part of the loan.
All right. Let's talk about Pakistan. What are the areas, what are the lacunas do you feel are present here that need to be worked upon locally by the different provincial governments? Because you know that there's the 18th Amendment here, that there's all the governments do their own things, they have their own organizations and they are independent. How does the IFAD help them stand on their own 2 feet as far as the agriculture produce or the agriculture development is concerned?
Yeah, from IFAD's perspective, our focus is really in improving the productivity of farmers at the local level.
All right.
So that they can generate more, not only for themselves, but have even surplus and be able to sell that on the market. And that also requires not only production and productivity, it also requires IFAD supporting provincial governments, but also local governments in promoting that access to market through the construction of infrastructure, market infrastructure, roads. So that is the angle through which we come. But we also do help with policy issues. I think it's important to underline that. Our investments can only be successful if we're able to engage with government in ensuring that there is a conducive policy environment to ensure that farmers, if they do produce, get the right prices.
Is there a conducive environment in Pakistan? Are you satisfied with it?
I would not say to the contrary. I think at the low, of course, there are areas in which things can improve. I'm concerned more holistically about the inflation that I'm seeing in the country, and that is, of course, a concern for poor communities, especially in rural areas. But these are, of course, much larger issues beyond what IFAD can really deal with.
There is a South-South cooperation as far as Pakistan and IFAD is concerned. Do you feel Pakistan and the IFAD could work on a triangular cooperation as well?
For sure. And in that context, I want to mention one component of my visit here is that I want to organize a regional seminar in Islamabad next year of a project that IFAD is managing, funding, actually from Chinese, the Chinese facility I mentioned earlier, the Chinese South-South Cooperation Facility.
And they have been donating generously.
They have been donating generously. So it's a project that we are managing on how do you really incorporate South-South cooperation in projects. And I want to organize this regional seminar here. Even if the project covers 7 countries, I think Pakistan would provide a very opportune venue for such a dialogue.
All right. How do you see the future of this portal, and do you feel amendments are needed in it with the changing times, especially COVID-19?
Well, absolutely yes. In addition to what I mentioned earlier, that we need to see how we can make sure that the portal is accessible at the local level, at the grassroots level. That is fundamental, and we will need to take some steps in that direction. The portal needs to be populated with successful experiences of COVID response in the agriculture sector. And that, of course, will not be there because we have just started the stimulus facility I spoke about earlier. But in the coming 6 to 8 months, once we start seeing some results of projects funded through the stimulus facility, we might need to capture those experiences and post them on the portal and make them accessible more widely.
When we come to Pakistan, there are a lot of other issues as well. We've had the locust issue a couple of months back as well. Does the IFAD also assist Pakistan or help Pakistan or advise Pakistan in how to deal with such issues?
Very much so. We have a grant window also. In addition to providing concessional loans for large projects, we have a grant window where for agriculture research and development. So over the years, we have financed a lot of research in Asia. which cuts across countries, not necessarily specific countries. So we give them to regional institutions that do research on agriculture-related issues, including locust. In Africa, another example was the cassava mealybug. So we have that window of opportunity as well. Yes.
All right. Now, I would like to generalize a little bit as far as the work that the IFID is doing across the world is concerned. Which is the continent that you feel is the most susceptible as far as agriculture produce and all the issues that you work on is concerned? Which country or which continent are you really concerned about that you feel the IFID should really work diligently on?
I would say Asia, because I'm from Asia myself, and I love this region. And of course, Asia has major challenges because of the numbers. The numbers of people living in poverty. Countries like Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, India, and others, Philippines, Indonesia. The challenge is huge. So I would not want to neglect Asia, but I would have to say Africa.
All right.
We are very concerned about progress in Africa because of the major challenges. Institutions generally are weaker in Africa. The policy context, the governance. So I think IFAD actually focuses close to 50% of its annual commitments are made for projects in Africa. Climate change is having a major impact in countries in Africa. So that is, I think, the region that needs the focus as we move forward, without neglecting, of course, the other regions.
With climate change affecting so many countries across the world, including Pakistan and so many others as well, and of course different other challenges that we do not know even that might happen in the future. Is the IFAD preparing itself for future challenges as well?
We are. And actually, we are going through this replenishment, as I mentioned earlier, with a new vision. One of the major transformations that is taking place in IFAD now is the decentralization of the organization.
All right.
And already we have been through decentralization. Now we're taking it to the next level. Our president is very visionary, and he wants to make sure that all our country directors and the technical staff are close to the clients at the country level, in the regions, to be able to provide more prompt response to our clients' needs. So that is, I would say, that is equipping the organization to be fit for purpose and to be able to respond to requirements in a more efficient manner. But in terms of also our vision, I would like to bring this in terms of our vision for combating
exactly, because
poverty.
you know that the future vision, future objectives.
In terms of our vision, one new area we're going into in quite a significant way, is still at the infancy, is lending to the private sector.
Okay.
Other multilateral development banks do that.
Are there certain criteria for investment, for lending to the private sector as compared to the public sector?
Of course, of course. There's a much more thorough, for example, much more thorough due diligence process that you're, depending on the company you're working with, because as a multilateral organization managing the money of donors, we have to be very careful in ensuring any risks. So that's a new direction we're going into, because without the private sector, without really mobilizing the private sector along with the public sector, I don't think we will meet the SDGs. So IFAD is starting right now with the first investment in a private company in Nigeria.
All right.
So it's only a 5 million...
so you're beginning with the continent that you're most afraid of, in fact, as far as its future is concerned.
Correct, and the largest country with the largest number of population in Africa, where we also have a lot of experience. So we are presenting a proposal for lending to a private sector company in Nigeria. It's likely to go to our December board this year. That will be our first experience of providing this $5 million, through which the private sector hopes to leverage another $190 million to provide inputs, services, technology, capacity building to farmers, particularly in maize and in rice.
All right.
So that's a new direction in which we're going. But this does not mean we will abandon our traditional approach of working with governments.
But that is a model that you're beginning, and if it works, then you
might scale it up.
That model.
We might scale it up as well, yes.
Yeah. All right, all right. Ashwani Muthu, thank you very much to have joined us, to have given us such a thorough and informative insight into what the IFAD stands for, whether it be the cooperation with Pakistan, whether it be the cooperation with other countries across the world. We need to understand that because countries such as Pakistan that are mainly based on agriculture need to stand on their own feet, and it's due to organizations such as yours and of course through your assistance through different means, whether it be monetary or other programs, or whether it be empowering the womankind of countries such as Pakistan, that you make countries like Pakistan stand on its own feet. It's very important for countries to stand on their own, for societies to stand on their own, for them to make their own produce. And it's very important for organizations such as yourself to be there for those nations and, you know, stand your head high. And I'm sure you will be very proud of those 25 years that you've spent in the IFAD, saying that you see this is my success model and I'm so proud of what I've done. And we wish you all the very best for a very, very bright future, and we hope to see you very soon with new projects in Pakistan. Who knows, maybe you will implement the private industry model in Pakistan as well.
Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to being here again.
That was Mr. Ashwani K.MUTHOO from the IFAD. As you've seen, agriculture, Pakistan, of course, are interdependent. So it's very important for organizations such as the IFAD and for countries such as Pakistan to cooperate diligently together in order to strengthen the rural communities in Pakistan, especially in the face of challenges such as COVID-19. And I hope with all the new technologies, with all the empowerment that the IFAD is bringing to the communities in Pakistan and other countries across the globe, it won't be far away when the whole world will be a beautiful place to live in, whether you are in a city or in a village. With that, we come to an end of this very interesting episode of Diplomatic Enclave. We'll see you again next week, same time, same channel, with other guests. Stay tuned, stay safe in these COVID times, and Allah Hafiz. And I'd say in these COVID times, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.